I was having my second cup of coffee, rubbing the stubble on my face and thinking about the painful task ahead of me. My wife and I had just returned late last night from a trip to Yellowstone Park with another couple when we arrived into our driveway. I had just enough energy to get out of the van and into bed. Debbie went to work Monday morning, but I was able to sleep for a few more hours. My shift did not end until 4 p.m. My name is Dave Dawson, and my wife's name is Debbie. We were married only a year ago, last month. The trip was a kind of anniversary gift. Debbie had worked long enough to save for 5 days of vacation. With the weekend off, we had 9 days to travel around and see the sights. Plus, we were going to start a family soon, and we didn't have any more extended vacations planned. So we decided to take the trip while the stars were still aligned. We traveled with our friends John and Kathy Harrison. The four of us were able to travel through the park and back, allowing us to spend a complete 7 days there. John and Katie had a 15-month-old kid, and Katie's mother happened to be available this week to stay at their house and babysit. I strolled out to the driveway and opened the side doors of my 2-year-old custom-built Chevy van. Imagine how much crap 4 adults can amass in 9 days of travel. That's exactly what I observed. When we dropped John and Kathy off yesterday night, they had already moved the most of their belongings. Looking at the disarray, I started rummaging through my belongings. Our baggage remained on the floor, along with a package of food, a cooler, camping equipment, and a pile of soiled clothes. The suitcases were returned to the house while the dirty clothing was disposed of. The contents of the refrigerator were returned to the freezer, the food was returned to the pantry, and the camping and fishing gear returned to the garage. I looked at the bed I'd erected in the back of the van and decided I might as well remove the mattress and vacuum the entire floor. I took the vacuum and wastebasket out of the garage, opened the back doors, grabbed the bedding, and began tugging. The twin-sized mattress was specifically constructed to fit snugly over the width of the vehicle. It eventually let go loudly, and I fell on my buttocks as the mattress, linen, and a slew of other detritus tipped out at once. I rose to my feet, divided the linen, and laid it away for washing. I grabbed the wastebasket and began filling it with the items that had poured out with the mattress. McDonald's wrappers, beer cans with lids, rolled-up napkins, smashed styrofoam coffee cups, and condom wrappers. I stopped staring blankly at the final item I set up. My head became dizzy, and I wondered how this happened. I smoothed the torn wrapper across the front of my knee. It read Trojan thin. Something wasn't right. I knew it had not been there before. We went to Yellowstone. Before we loaded into the van, I completely cleaned it, removing the mattress, vacuuming it, and placing fresh sheets on the floor. I went through the wrapping with my fingers, thinking about my possibilities. Debbie had stopped taking the pill a month before we chose to start our family. When she ended her first year of work, John and Kathy made no secret that she was on the pill until their son was 2 years old. Then they intended to have a second pregnancy. I was wondering if it was a joke. John occasionally had a strange sense of humor, especially after a few beers. For a few minutes, I considered the possibility. Then I took the wastebasket and emptied its contents onto the path. I started sifting through the trash, carefully inspecting it until I found a bundle of rolled-up tissue. I inspected it carefully, ripping it apart. When the final piece of fabric was peeled away, the sight of dry, crumpled rubber bands became clear. This is not a prank. I suddenly feel nauseated. I sat up abruptly and placed my head between my legs, attempting to keep from vomiting. The reasoning seemed inescapable. 1 person was doing this in my van. 2, that someone was not me. 3. Debbie was the only woman on this trip who was at risk of becoming pregnant. As I sat hunched over, I thought about the intricacies of our vacation. When we were camping, John and Kathy only slept in the van on the road. They slept in a 2-person tent equipped with an inflatable mattress. Debbie and I slept in the van alone while we were at the park. Except for one day during our 4th day in the park, the 4 of us spent the majority of the week hiking, swimming, and sightseeing together. I intended to travel to a tiny lake located approximately 5 miles down the road. It had a waterfall and was reported to have some large fish. I decided to use my fishing rod and some lures to give it a go. Kathy agreed, but Debbie stated she was exhausted and didn't want to leave. John offered to stay with Debbie and go into town to get groceries as we were running low. So, after an early lunch, Kathy and I started down the route. Kathy and I returned to our campsite after more than 5 hours. We were tired, yet happy with our excursion. Debbie and John had made dinner on our small propane stove and were sitting around drinking beer. They had clearly had more than a few drinks that day, as demonstrated by the bag full of empty bottles. They were drinking beers, and Debbie was grinning, laughing, and generally tipsy. I noticed Kathy frown when she realized what was going on. John's drinking was occasionally problematic, and they appear to have given it a lot of thought. So far, we have refrained. John and Kathy had pitched their tent just a few feet away from us, and it was so warm that we slept in the vehicle. The doors are open, except for the mosquito netting. The next morning, John glanced at me with a smug expression, as if he realized what we had done the night prior. Now I see that look was more like, "You stupid garbage. I just entertained your wife, and you have no idea." And the awful feeling I had in my belly told me that I was beginning to believe it too. As I cleaned the inside of the van before getting the hose and cleaning the outside, my thoughts drifted back 3 years to when Debbie and I met. I had just turned 20, and I was in the second semester of my sophomore year at Northern Michigan University. I was an electrical engineering major who was doing well academically, but financial troubles were wearing me down. I never qualified for a scholarship, so for the last 2 years, I'd been paying my tuition with money saved from working at high schools and auto plants throughout the summers. However, the money was running out. I knew I wouldn't be able to afford junior high school this summer, and the part-time jobs I had during the school year were barely enough to cover my expenses. Mom and Dad were never much help to me either. We were Catholics. I had 3 younger brothers and a sister at home. Our parents insisted that we all go to parochial school at least until 9th grade. As a result, they continued to pay tuition for the younger students. My older sister finished public high school as a senior. I had 2 options: take out student loans and graduate with a huge financial load, or drop out for 2 years and try to save enough money to graduate. I had previously determined that a break would not be unreasonable. The regular deadlines and exams are becoming burdensome. Furthermore, I'm bored of living in a 4-person room. Regardless of how hard you try, you will always have at least one butthole. Roommate. I had previously sent a letter to the personnel office at the assembly factory where I had worked the previous summer to inquire about a position. It was Friday night, and examinations had just finished. A few dorm residents decided to slip through a few feet of snow to an off-campus party to celebrate. It was a standard fraternity beer party. You can drink all the beer you want. Guys paid $5 each, but girls got in for free. The music was loud, and some people danced in one room while others played drinking games before the night ended. A few guys were lucky enough to hook up in one of the upstairs bedrooms. While in college, I dated ladies on occasion, but I hadn't had a consistent girlfriend since high school. Even though I wasn't a virgin, I lost it on prom night. I could count on one hand the remaining digits of the girls I had been with. The engineering curriculum was challenging, and I was always moonlighting. I spent all of my free time in the activity center playing basketball or racquetball after we came home. One of my roommates, Josh, gestured to a group in the corner, and I simply nodded and said I'd bring him a beer. I made my way past the groups of students dancing or conversing, careful not to spill the beer from the 2 plastic cups I received from the keg guy. Finally, I noticed Josh speaking with a couple of girls at the far end of the hall. As I approached, he went over and grabbed one of the cups, saying, "Dave, I'd like you to meet Miranda. We're in Economics 202 together, and this is Debbie, her roommate, and this is Dave." I smiled at Miranda, a beautiful brunette, and offered my hand. "Hello, Miranda. Nice to meet you." I then looked at her roommate, extended my hand, and froze. One of the most beautiful girls I'd ever seen was standing in front of me. She had long, reddish blonde hair and green eyes, which revealed her Irish heritage. Her smile lit up the room. I soon awoke to Josh, Miranda, and Debbie laughing at me. I blushed and apologized. "I apologize. I did not mean to be rude. I could not help myself." I looked Debbie in the eyes and said, "But you are the most beautiful girl I have ever met." Now it was her time to blush. "Okay, thanks, Ken. Girls cannot get enough of that." "And she laughed," Josh remarked. "You know, you're almost housemates. Debbie is from DeWitt." "Not kidding. I am from Okemos. Did you attend DeWitt High School? No, I attended Gabriel Catholic High School. She said, hey, I'm Catholic too, but my parents could not afford the tuition, said I. The two of us began conversing and eventually retreated to one of the corners. Gabriel's school was a middle school that served approximately half a dozen parishes, including mine and Debbie's. Many of my friends from Catholic high school attended there. It turns out she knew a few of them, and we graduated the same year. We talked and talked, utterly oblivious to the time, until Miranda walked up and said, I'm sorry to separate you two, but it's past midnight and snowing again. We should return to the dormitory. Debbie glanced at me with what I assumed was remorse and said, well, I suppose I should leave. Trying to avoid sounding desperate, I replied, wait, I'd like to meet you again. May I call you? I grinned sheepishly. Okay, I'm in East Shore Hall. Debbie, I don't even know what your last name is. Koenig Connect. I know that's a mouthful, she responded, slightly embarrassed. I looked at her in wonder. You are a K-13. The first emigrated from Germany in the mid-19th century and settled in many mid-Michigan villages during the next 100 years. They were so numerous that their offspring ruled many rural schools. According to the anecdote, one enraged teacher gave them the nickname K-13 for the 13 letters in their name, which stuck. Then she laughed. My fault, but my mother is Irish by blood. You would not believe it. I have an uncle who married a K-13 from around Standish, I explained. Not kidding. Call me so we can discuss more. Miranda took her hand and guided her to the door. You betcha, I told her and watched as they walked away into the night. The following day, I called her back. I was so in love with her that I couldn't wait. A day later, we gathered for pizza. It was still a school night, but we spent hours talking about our homeschool friends and families. Her parents preferred that she attend college close to home after high school, but she was sick of feeling pressured by her parents. She applied to many institutions around the state and chose the one that was the farthest away from her home. 400 miles proved to be sufficient distance to break the closest of ties. Debbie was studying marketing and had been working for the same retail chain for several years before being hired as an intern in their business office during her approaching vacation. She was in college on a partial scholarship and student loans, so maintaining good grades was important to her. She had two sisters, an older sister and a younger sibling. Her parents were still paying for the younger one's high school tuition, while the elder one was attending a state college near Detroit. So they were quite busy and could only offer limited assistance. She claimed to being a junior cheerleader in high school, but never auditioned for the senior squad. She liked the sea and spent the last 2 summers of high school working as a lifeguard at the local country club. Apparently, her parents were quite strict with her and her sisters. She claimed she was not permitted to go out much in high school. Miranda subsequently told me, through Josh, that she was making up for lost time after attending college. Guys lined up to go dates with her. She went out once or twice a week, but she was not consistent. I was determined to become closer to her. I asked her out again, and we spent the rest of the semester going out regularly. We always had a wonderful time. She has a wonderful personality and sense of humor. I could sit and listen to her for hours. She enjoyed college parties. When the weather warmed up, we'd have a few beers and dance. I could picture her wearing something other than boots and big hoodies. She was really skinny. Unlike her, I was just over 6 feet tall and weighed 190 pounds. I had brown hair, brown eyes, and appropriate but subtle facial characteristics. I was in good shape due to daily workout, but my appearance is best described as stocky. I had a little swarthy complexion, but I didn't stick out from the crowd. We dated until the semester ended around 6 weeks later, but I was aware that she was also dating other people. On our final date before the semester finished, we discussed meeting up after we got home. We lived only 20 miles apart, and she expressed her want to continue seeing me, but it wasn't until I informed her of my intention not to return to college the next school year that she understood what I meant. She seemed to pause and thoroughly evaluate me. It appeared to me that she accepted the notion and my rationale, but later that night, instead of huddling up and sitting somewhere together, she stated that she needed to study for her final exam, which ended our evening. I drove her back to her dormitory. She gave me a short kiss and embrace before running inside, not mentioning anything about my pensive call to her when we arrived home. I strolled back to my room, wondering what had happened since my last exam and before I left school. I tried calling her, but one of her roommates stated she wasn't at home. I knew her parents had arrived to pick her up and wondered whether they had gone elsewhere. Moving in with parents and siblings is never easy, but we managed to get through it. And the day after I returned home, I resumed working at the facility. I was fortunate enough to land a position as a quality controller on the day shift for the first 90 days following that. I would definitely switch to one of the other shifts several times. I tried calling Debbie in the evening at her parents' place, but they always stated she wasn't home. I left my phone number, but I got the impression she had blown me off. The thought broke my heart, but I knew that if I continued to pursue her, things would not go well. About a week later, my mother startled me by handing me the phone and saying, "This is Debbie." When I responded, Debbie apologized for missing me. The first few times I called, I hoped I wasn't upset with her. I told her I wasn't. We talked briefly about final exams and our new employment. Finally, she replied gently, "Dave, I was hoping you'd call and ask me out." "I was hoping, Debbie, but since I hadn't been able to reach you in the last few weeks, I assumed you didn't want to hear from me." I said sadly, No, Dave. Please do not think that way." I admit, I was a little disappointed when you announced you weren't going back to school. "I wasn't sure what to think, but I'd like to go out with you again," she stated. With that, the glorious summer began. Because we both worked, we could see each other a few times a week, and I was confident she wasn't seeing anybody else. I eventually got to know her family, and she learned about mine. With the exception of my older sister, we all appeared to click. She didn't appear pleased with Debbie for some reason, but I ignored it. We went to the movies, went out to eat, and occasionally had parties with her or my high school pals. We visited the shore on Lake Michigan a few times when we had a day off together. When I saw Debbie wearing a bikini, my eyes would well up with tears of joy. We played around in the lake and she laughed at me when I tugged on my swim trunks and couldn't get out. At the end of July, I realized I couldn't live at home for the 2 years it would take to accumulate enough money to return to school. I was making a nice wage and thought I could afford a little apartment. But the most essential reason was that I desperately wanted Debbie to be alone. I was pretty confident we agreed on where to go next in our relationship. Mom and Dad were pleased with the news and assisted me in obtaining good used furniture from friends and relatives. I moved in just a few weeks before Debbie was set to return to school. That first weekend, we went out to dinner and returned to the apartment, both realizing what was about to happen over the next 3 weeks. "Debbie, please spend an evening with me every few days." She told her parents one day that she was going to spend the night with a friend and would stay until the next morning. It was fantastic. I wanted to learn everything about her. We talked for hours on end. She told me how much she enjoyed college, the classes, the social elements, and the overall experience. According to her, her parents were still attempting to regulate her social life as the time came for her to depart. I felt increasingly depressed on the last night we spent together. We were talking. I told Debbie, "I know we've been avoiding talking about it, but since you're leaving tomorrow, I think we should. I think I love you and don't want to stop seeing you." Debbie hung her head. "I truly like you, Dave. Maybe it is love. I do not know. But we have only been dating for a few months and I do not want to quit seeing you. But we'll be 400 miles away for the majority of the school year and we'll both be busy trying not to sound desperate." I asked, "Can we get together a few times before Christmas break?" "Sure, Dave. We can try." She stated it without conviction. "Debbie, I want you to know that you are the only female for me and I would like to get you something before you depart." I took a jewelry box from her bedside and opened it for her. Inside was a white gold ring with amethyst and diamond chips on each side. Amethyst was her birthstone. Debbie's eyes widened and her hands slid up in front of her lips. "Dave, it's beautiful. I want Debbie to wear it. And when you look at it, please remember me." She slid it on her finger and hugged me so hard that tears streamed. "Of course I will, Dave." After that evening, we only spoke on the phone once more before she departed. I offered to give Debbie a ride, but her father had purchased her a 5-year-old automobile to travel around in. I was disappointed with our talk that evening, as well as her lack of excitement for what I was saying. I wanted her to be my girlfriend. I wanted us to have an exclusive connection if we were still in high school. I would have asked her for a date. Instead, I suspected she was attempting to let me down gently. When Debbie was gone, I did almost nothing except work a couple times a week. I went to the YMCA with other men and we played basketball. I spent practically every weekend at my parents' house and they made sure I ate well. Every other day I called Debbie's dormitory. About half of the time I found her at home. I also texted her a few times each week. We spoke and wrote about her coming down or me getting up, but we couldn't seem to agree. Eventually, the calls and letters started to drift apart. A few weeks following Debbie's departure, I was asked if I wanted to take the electrician's apprenticeship exam at work. It could take 2 to 4 years depending on how many hours I worked per month, but I'd earned 2 years of college credit. The compensation was around 20% higher than what I was earning today, plus the company paid for college-level technical classes. Even if I leave before finishing college, I would have a higher wage level. I took the exam and passed effortlessly. After a while, I began the program. I loved the internship program. I've always been fascinated with gadgets, stereo equipment, and all things electronic. That is what motivated me to study electrical engineering. And I've always had a flair with tools. I had nearly infinite work potential, and as I gained experience, journeyman electricians would ask me to assist them on backworks for which we were normally compensated. With that money, I could buy any toys I desired. But I had an ambition of finishing high school. I never went on dates, despite the fact that I had plenty of opportunity. I was in love with Debbie, and it was my second dream. So the money was in the bank or invested in a few ventures a couple of weeks before Thanksgiving. During one of our now rare phone chats, Debbie reminded me that she would be home the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving and would not have to leave until Sunday afternoon. She expressed her wish that she would be able to spend the most of her time with me for the first time since she left. I was excited at the prospect of seeing her again. We planned to meet at her house following Thanksgiving dinner. Seeing her again was like a shot of booze. I couldn't stop staring at her even though I couldn't say anything. Her father and mother were pleased to see me, and her 2 sisters greeted me cordially. Her father and I hit it off right away when we discovered that the K-13 my uncle married was his distant cousin, and I don't think any of us were very pleased that Debbie hadn't visited the house since she left for school. I spent a few hours there eating dessert and watching football. Eventually, I suggested to Debbie that we go to the movies. Debbie grabbed at the opportunity, and we departed immediately, disregarding her parents' obvious dismay. We drove directly to my house. This time, we tumbled into bed and started right to work. When it was time for Debbie to leave, we knew Christmas was just a few weeks away. This time, I kissed Debbie goodbye. "Are you feeling better about our separation?" 3 weeks later, Thanksgiving occurred again. It seemed as if we had never been separated. I got 2 weeks off because the auto plant was closed for the holidays. We had plenty of time to spend together. We attended Christmas parties and did some holiday shopping. She spent time with my family while I spent time with hers. I assisted her father with the wiring in the basement recreation area. He finished and became his friend forever for Christmas. I gave her amethyst earrings and a pendant to match her ring. I also received 2 lovely cable-knit sweaters, which I thought looked wonderful on me again. We spent a few nights at my flat, gradually increasing our time there. She remained overnight at my house. I wasn't sure what she was telling her parents, so I didn't ask. Even then, I knew I'd be glad to spend the rest of my life with her in this way. The day prior, she had to return to school. We discussed splitting again and being able to see each other once a month. She was evasive again, refusing to offer anything. Another thing that made me upset was that I often told her that I thought I was in love with her. Every time she smiled, hugged, or kissed me, she didn't respond. I brought it up on our final day together. After hugging her, I told her, "Debbie, I understand that talking about my feelings makes you uncomfortable. I love you, and I want us to have a future together, but you don't seem to feel the same way." She gazed at me through tears. "Thank you, Dave. I enjoy being with you and performing activities with you. Can't we just be happy when we're together? Debbie, I am delighted when we are together. I just want to see you more frequently. I want you to understand that there is no one else for me. I hope you feel the same way." Debbie's gaze shifted to the side for the first time, and she was no longer staring at me. "Dave, we've been so far away for so long that I don't expect you to sit at home with no life. Debbie, I am not interested in dating anyone else. Nobody can compare to what we have. I want to. I hope you feel the same way. Debbie. They hugged and kissed me. We forgot about our chat for a moment. Later, when I thought about it, I realized she never answered to me. When I thought about it, I realized she wasn't as committed to our relationship as I was. I grew gloomy and despondent, so I kept myself as busy as possible, taking any opportunity for overtime. Working a part-time work every week, attending compulsory college classes, and spending a few hours at the YMCA. A few mornings each week, a few weeks after vacation. One of the electricians was informing everyone about the house he was selling. His father had died the year before, and the house was part of the bequest. The house was dilapidated, but it was in a nice neighborhood with a decent school. His family simply wanted to get out from under it, and they were willing to give it away cheaply. They were even willing to sign a 5-year land purchase agreement that included an inflating balloon at the end to get rid of it. I decided to take a closer look at it because the payments were just slightly higher than my current rent. It was a 2-story house with a total area of over 2,052 square feet. It had 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and was on a huge corner lot. The one thing I didn't like about it was that the enormous garage was not related to the home and was located approximately 50 feet behind it. The house required a lot of maintenance. My parents had lived in the house for 40 years and had barely renovated anything in it. But I knew that if I finished everything before my 5-year contract expired, the house would be worth 3 or 4 times what I bought for it, and it would be easy to acquire a mortgage. I made an offer, and after some bargaining, we struck a deal. A few weeks later, I moved out of the apartment and into my new home. I didn't tell Debbie about it since I wanted to surprise her, but she didn't seem to care, which astonished me. I kept trying to get Debbie to come over. Finally, I stated that if she was unable to come down, I would approach her. When I said that, she suggested we meet halfway. We selected a date in a couple of weeks, and I planned to take a few days off as the day approached. The weather and ESP intensified, and it appeared that one blizzard followed another. A few days before our appointment, she called to say she was having car problems, and with the weather like today, she wanted to postpone her trip. I was horribly disappointed. I agreed, and after we hung up, my mood was ruined. It seems that our next opportunity to get together had passed. Spring break. Meanwhile, in my leisure time, I've been working on the house. I asked one of the carpenters at work, who was also a builder, to help me design how I wanted the house to look when it was built. The ultimate project was somewhat ambitious, but in the back of my mind, I hoped to create something Debbie would want to live in someday. I set priorities for the project. I planned to finish the kitchen first, followed by the bathrooms and the remaining rooms. As the weather improved, I'd start the exterior work. The expense of remodeling the house was high in terms of materials, but labor was inexpensive. The majority of the factory's craftspeople swapped labor among themselves. That is what I was doing. I provided electrical and general labor to those in need, and carpenters, glaziers, painters, and heating and conditioning specialists would then complete the work for me. A couple of weeks before spring break, I received a call from Debbie's father, Carl. I maintained in touch with both him and Debbie's mother, Angela. I even came by to see them a few times after Christmas. Carl and Angela both knew how I felt about Debbie, and they understood my aggravation, which was reflected in their efforts to preserve a long-distance relationship with her. When I answered the phone, Carl asked, "How do you feel about Debbie's plans for spring break?" I was perplexed. "What do you mean by, you don't know?" I haven't spoken to her in a week, but I assume she's returning home. I mentioned she called yesterday night. She intends to travel to Corpus Christi with a few girlfriends, he said, visibly dissatisfied. I asked her what you said when she messaged you, but she declined to tell me. I couldn't believe she hadn't spoken to you about it. No, she didn't say anything. I'm not sure what came over her, I honestly don't. I asked if she planned to stop here on her route to Texas. She said no. Her girlfriend Miranda lives in Milwaukee, so they'll go there to pick up the automobile. So they'll drive through Wisconsin before heading back south. They intended to return in the same manner when the meaning of his words reached me. I was angry at Debbie for the first time. Did she really care so little about this that she didn't even discuss it with me first? She understood how much I wanted to spend my vacation with her. I told her I could not wait for her to see the house. I was hoping to get her feedback on the decorating, so I requested a couple of days off so we could spend 4 days together while she was home. I bitterly commented that she appears to have made up her mind. Carl? Apparently our relationship isn't important enough for her to speak to me first. I am sorry, Dave. You do not deserve to be treated in that manner either. He said we'd talk for a few more minutes before hanging up. Sitting in the dilapidated kitchen of what I hoped would one day be our home, I realized that no matter how much you want something, it isn't enough to make it happen. I realized now that our relationship was primarily one-sided. My dreams did not match hers. There was nothing I could do to make her love me like I loved her. I shook my head and wiped my tears. I felt as if a close relative had passed away unexpectedly. When that occurs, you feel a tremendous loss. You continue to love them, but you realize you must accept and move on. Debbie had left a message on my answering machine the next day when I returned home from my college class. Dave, I'm sorry for missing you. Could you please call me as soon as you receive this? I really want to speak with you. Thank you, babe. Her voice was happy and upbeat. I suspected she wanted to kick my buttocks for not returning home for spring break. I shook my head, deleted the message, and headed to work the next day. I worked my part-time job almost to the end of my shift. As I walked through the kitchen, I noticed Debbie's message on the recorder again. This time, it's not so cheerful. Dave, please call me, honey. I talked to Daddy last night, and he informed you that my plans for spring break had changed. Please give me a call. Okay, let me explain. I'll be in the dorms all day. This is the time. I noticed a hint of concern in her voice. Her father must have chastised her for not talking to me first. I deleted the message again and resumed my normal activities. My mother called a few days later and asked what had happened to Debbie. I inquired what she meant. She spoke. Debbie called and requested my new address. When asked why she hadn't spoken with me, she responded invasively. I replied hesitantly, Debbie and I are no longer seeing each other. Mom let out a gasp. Dave, why? What exactly happened? She and I disagreed about what was important to us. I quietly said, I'm sorry, honey. I know how difficult this is. Why don't you come over for dinner this Sunday and we can celebrate your birthday? Okay. Saturday was my birthday, but because I was going to be able to legally drink, a few coworkers offered to take me out. So I told her I would be there on Sunday. My 21st birthday came and went. The guys invited me out. I had a few drinks, danced briefly with some women, and declined a couple of advances. I didn't hear anything from Debbie, but I wasn't expecting to. I was not sure she remembered my birthday, despite the fact that we discussed it being only a few months before hers. The following day, I had dinner with my family. My brother and sister were there, and my sister was now a freshman at a state university 30 miles away. My mother prepared my favorite meals, and everyone gave me gifts. It was a great time. After dinner, Angie left me alone and inquired about Debbie's situation. Angie and I, being the most similar in age, have always been close. I told her everything that had happened in the previous year, all of my frustrations with trying to keep our relationship alive, and then I reached my breaking point when she blew me off to go south for spring break. Dave, I know you were wondering why I didn't like Debbie when you started dating her. She claimed I never told you that I knew Debbie's younger sister, Sarah. Not well, but well enough to talk to her. We were both in the same all-party Catholic youth group during our senior year in high school. After you started dating, I sat and talked with her at one of our meetings. I added that I knew someone was dating her sister. I didn't tell her it was my brother. She had a lot to say about Debbie. I don't think she loves her much. According to her, Debbie was selfish and self-centered, and because of her looks, she always got everything she wanted, according to her. Even in high school, she had at least 2 suitors, and she was always on the lookout for another. And no matter how much her parents tried to limit her social activity, she still managed to go out a lot. I thought about what she'd said to me for a moment. Then I just shrugged and said sadly, I don't know, Angie. I didn't notice that about her. All I know is that I loved her, and I think I still do. But I just can't live like that. If she doesn't feel the same way about me as I do about her, then I guess we'd better go our separate ways. Angie hugged me and said nothing more. The following weekend, Debbie's father, Carl, stopped by the house to see me. I gave him a tour of the house and grounds, showing him half a dozen projects I'd been working on. He was amazed. Did you tell me how much you paid for this house? He inquired. When I told him, he said, Wow, If you do all the work and renovations, this place will be worth 3 or 4 times as much." He shook his head. "I can't believe you just turned 21. That's a great investment for someone twice your age." He looked at me intently. "Dave, I want you to know that I'd be proud to have you as my son-in-law. I haven't met anyone who works as hard as you do for what you want." A little embarrassed, I replied, "Thanks, Carl, but we never got to that point in our relationship." Carl looked me straight in the eye. "Maybe not, Dave, but we could understand how you felt about Debbie, and I knew where she was on the night. She said she was staying at a friend's house. No, don't feel bad about it. We always felt she was safe with you. I'm just sorry it didn't work out." I just shrugged and changed the subject. But on his way out the door, he said, "Not that it matters to you, but she called and said she got to Corpus Christi." "Okay." Then he left for the next few months. My daily routine was pretty much the same: factory work, housework, the occasional part-time job, spending a couple hours in the classroom on Tuesdays and Thursdays, playing basketball at the YMCA on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. The only thing that changed was that as the weather got warmer, I started working outside. But I was pleased with how the work on the house was progressing, and I found that the more I worked, the better I slept at night. If I was up at night, I was thinking about Debbie and how much I missed her. And when I missed her, I couldn't sleep. It was a vicious cycle that could not be avoided. I received another phone message from her after she returned from Texas. I deleted it as soon as I heard her voice. It was Debbie's birthday about a month after spring break. I thought about it for a long time, but finally sent her a card. It was pretty simple, and I just signed it. I just wanted her to know that I remembered. Then the work began again near noon on Memorial Day Saturday. I heard someone banging on the front door. The plant was closed for all 3 days, and I was hoping to finish one particular project in the backyard and had been at it since 9 in the morning. "Swinging the door open?" I inquired. "Yes," somewhat irritably. Everything else I could have said instantly froze in my throat. There stood Debbie. She was as beautiful as ever, and it still took my breath away. Her eyes were wide open and a look of shock frozen on her face. I rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. She practically stuttered. Then she whispered, "Dave, what happened to you?" I looked down at myself and thought, what does she mean? I stood there in worn, cropped khaki pants, work boots, and no shirt. A carpenter's tool belt hung from my hips. I was sweaty and covered in a thin layer of sawdust from the circular saw. I'd been turning on and off all morning, and then it came to me that Debbie hadn't seen me in 6 months. I knew I'd lost 10 or pound 15 since then, since I bought the house in January. I'd been working like crazy, and my efforts doubled when she left for spring break. I rarely sat down at the table anymore, and I had little interest in food in general. The fat I used to carry around was practically gone the way my clothes fit. I realized I'd lost a couple of inches in my waist and gained a couple of inches in my chest and shoulders. Plus, I hadn't shaved more than every other day lately, so I had a good 2 days' worth of vegetation. I also cut my hair shorter when the warm weather set in. Now that I thought about it, I felt like I was living on the edge of a precipice. I opened the door wide. "Come on in. I'll turn off the radio." I stepped away from the door to the dining room and turned off the music. I walked back to Debbie, standing at the front of the house. She looked a little awkward as I scrutinized her closely. She was wearing white, short shorts, sandals, and a tight pastel-colored tank top. Her hair was gathered into a ponytail, and she was wearing sunglasses on her head. I noticed she was wearing the amethyst ring I had given her. She looked good. The mere sight of her lifted my spirits. "Excuse me." I turned on the radio while I was working in the backyard and didn't hear the doorbell. I guess I looked kind of rude. I wasn't expecting visitors, I said, embarrassed. "No, you look fine, Dave. You're just different, that's all. I just wanted to see how you were doing. Dad said he stopped by here the other day and was impressed with the house. It looks big." She finally took her eyes off me and looked around the living room. "Would you like to take a tour?" I said, smiling. "Would you mind?" she said somewhat timidly. "Of course not. In fact, I'm even proud of the way the place is set up," said I as she started to follow me around. "The house is about 2000 F2. It originally had 4 bedrooms and 2 baths. I'm remodeling it so it has 3 bedrooms and 3 baths, 2 full baths upstairs and 1 downstairs. As you can see, we're rebuilding the field. Stone fireplace in the living room, and that piece of oak timber leaning against the wall will become the mantel. The floors downstairs are the original hardwood. After everything else is done, I plan to refinish the floor. We walked through the dining room and I pointed to the blueprints on the kitchen table. A builder friend drew a blueprint of how I want to do everything. I think it's going to take over a year to do everything. I led her into the kitchen, which was the only room I'd finished. It had all new appliances as marble countertops and new cabinets. The kitchen is the only room that is currently 100% finished right down to the paint. I said, "It's beautiful." She ran her hands over the marble. "Let's go upstairs before I show you the exterior." We climbed the steps and walked down the hallway. The master bedroom overlooks the backyard and has its own private bath. I replaced the stool sink, vanity, and tub. What's left is to put the flooring down and paint the walls. I led her past my double bed with an old country quilt spread out on it. I turned to look at her and saw that she was looking at the bedside table next to the phone, and the bedside lamp was a 5x7 photograph of her. This was the picture she had given me for Christmas. Finally, she took her eyes away and looked at the bathroom. "Wow, a jacuzzi tub?" She spoke. "Yeah." I ignored the obvious comment that it was big enough for two. Then I led her across the hall. The end bedroom was so small I decided to split it up. Part of it will be combined with the closet in the master bedroom to make it big enough for a walk-in closet. The other half, I'm going to turn into a full bath. I showed her the other two bedrooms, one of which was completely empty and the other used for my office. The only furnishings were a bed, a desk, a couple chairs, 2 shelves for books, and a small TV. We stepped back and stood on the top step, looking through the open-beamed ceiling to the living room that emphasized the size of the house. Debbie put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Dave, this house is huge. What are you going to do with all this space?" Looking at her, I slowly replied, "Well, when I bought it, I didn't envision living in it alone." As the implication became clear, Debbie's face reddened and she jerked her hand away, trying to diffuse the awkward situation. I said, "Come on, I'll show you the back of the house in the garage." I led her down the stairs through the dining room and sliding glass doors to the partially finished deck. This is what I'm working on this week. The deck is about 222 on 2 levels, with steps going down to the yard. It will be big enough for a gas grill, outdoor table chairs, and even a hot tub. I also plan to build a fence to enclose about 2052 of yard, enough to put in a pool someday. I led her over to the garage that stood 50 feet from the house. I know it's just a garage. It's a 2.5-car garage, but it has a big loft for storage. I plan to add an attic room on the side of the house and make a workshop in there. That's pretty much it. Except for the basement, which has enough room for a finished recreation room. Debbie slowly looked around the garage, house, and yard. "Well, Dave, it's obvious you're proud of what you do here, and I can see why. But how can you afford all this?" I scratched my neck and smiled. "Well, I don't pay for labor. I do most of it myself, or trade labor with other guys, and I get discounts on materials for the builders, and honestly, I don't have anything to spend money on but this house." "I see," she said thoughtfully. We chatted as we walked back up the driveway to her car. "Dave, I want to thank you for the birthday card. It was really nice of you not to forget," she said quietly. I just smiled and nodded. She started to get in the car, then stopped and looked me in the face. "Dave, Mom and Dad asked me to ask if you would come over for dinner on Monday. Dad is going to have a barbecue. It'll just be family there and maybe my sister's boyfriends." I shoved my hands in my pockets and stared at the floor, thinking about it. Finally, I looked up at her and said, "Wouldn't that be too awkward for you to have me around?" "I mean, no, Dave. It would mean a lot to me if you came. Please." She said, looking me straight in the eye, "Of course I'll come. What time?" With a wide smile on her face, she replied around 2 and bring a beer. "Okay." Smiling back at her, I said, "I will." I watched her pull out of the driveway and drive away. When I turned around to go back into the house, I realized I was smiling. In fact, I smiled. Most of the time she was here. On Memorial Day, I cleaned myself up and even shaved. I put on some decent shorts, a polo shirt, and sandals, grabbed a case of beer from the fridge, and headed over to her place. Debbie greeted me warmly at the door and surprised me with a peck on the cheek. She took my hand, leading me through the house to the back patio. Her mom and dad greeted me like the son never had. I had met her sisters the previous Christmas. Now she introduced me to her older sister's fiancé and her younger sister's boyfriend. Debbie's older sister, Elizabeth, was a more attractive version of her father. She had just graduated from college with a degree in financial management. She and her fiancé were getting married in the fall. Her younger sister, Sarah, was growing up and becoming more like Debbie and frankly smarter. She was just as good-looking but different. She had just graduated from high school and had been accepted to a state college not far from home. She was somewhat of a math major. She hadn't decided yet if she was going to major in accounting or engineering. We had a great time. Her father and I talked at length about my house, and her mother made occasional comments. They were both very interested in how things worked. Debbie didn't say anything, but her sisters listened intently and occasionally made comments. Sarah and Debbie helped with the food, and every now and then I would catch their glances and whisper amongst themselves. After dinner, we all sat around, sipping beer and socializing. I noticed there was no talk of spring break or Texas. I asked Debbie if she had seen Josh the school year. We had stopped communicating, and I wondered how he was doing. She replied that she only seen him once all semester, but Miranda saw him from time to time and even went out with him a couple of times toward evening. I said that I should probably go home. I thanked Carl and Angela for dinner, said goodbye to everyone else, and headed for the door. Debbie jumped up, walked over to my mom, whispered something to her, and said, "I'll walk you to the car." She took my hand, and we walked to my car and stopped. She looked at me and said, "Dave, can we talk for a few minutes? There's a little park at the end of the block. There are some picnic tables there, and no one will disturb us." Suspecting that the conversation would probably be about me being invited to dinner, I just nodded and we continued down the street. We chatted about all sorts of trivia until we finally came to a park. We sat down across from each other. We both fell silent as Debbie fidgeted until finally she clasped her hands together and looked at me. "Dave, I want to apologize for what I did to you over spring break. It was wrong. I know I should have discussed it with you, but I wanted to avoid a confrontation. Then, when you didn't return my calls, I decided to text you, but I didn't know what to say. When I got the opportunity to go, all I could think about was that I only had 2 years of college left, and this might be my last chance to do it. It was selfish, I know. I didn't think about how you would feel. I knew you wouldn't be happy with me, but I didn't think you'd cut me out of your life." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I see. Well, you've made a decision about what's important to you. It was painful and hurtful, but I figured it out," I said calmly. I shrugged, "But it's over. And so are we. We can both move on." She began to openly cry. "But Dave, I don't want to break up with you, please. I miss you and I want to be with you. Break up with me, Debbie. We were never together. Time. I wanted to get close to you. You kept me at arm's length. You've made it clear that you value your independence more than our relationship. If you don't have the same feelings for me as I do for you, then I'd better accept that fact and move on." She looked down at her hands. "I know, Dave. I was afraid to make a commitment. I felt like you were rushing me the last few months without. You have taught me a lot. I've realized that I do love you, and I hope you still love me." I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. "Debbie, I never stopped loving you. I just realized that I can't stop loving you back." Debbie looked up at me through her tears. "We can. Can we try again, Dave?" I thought about it for a few minutes, but immediately realized it was what I wanted more than anything. "I work at night. You work during the day. It's going to be hard to meet up," said I. "It doesn't matter, Dave. Whatever you want to do is fine with me," Debbie said, holding on to my hands. "I think I can be free of overtime on Saturday night. Let's plan something for Saturday or Saturday night. Okay? That would be great, Dave," she said, smiling and wiping tears from her eyes. That was the beginning of our reconciliation. Things went slowly for the first couple of weeks, but then we became inseparable again. During the week, I was still completely consumed with work and chores, but the weekends were spent together. I gave up overtime on weekends to carve out time to spend with her. Debbie started staying with me on weekends. I don't know what her mom and dad thought of that, but I know they were glad we were back together. I involved Debbie in choosing paint rugs and curtains for the house. She also had a great eye for landscaping. She started coming over a couple times a week while I was at work to complete some projects she was helping me with. Once or twice, I would come home from work and find her asleep in my bed. Needless to say, she called in sick to work on those mornings. The summer flew by. The car I had been driving for several years began to require maintenance. I traded it in for an almost new van a few weekends at the end of the summer. Debbie and I loaded it up and went camping along Lake Michigan the last weekend before Debbie had to go back to school. We both took Friday off and went to Wilderness State Park for 3 days. On Saturday, we lay on the beach and basked in the sun after a brisk swim in Lake Michigan. As we lay there, I began gently stroking her face. She turned and smiled at me. "My God, Dave, didn't you get seated last night?" "I'm never satiated with you, Debbie." I spoke. She rolled over to me and we lay face to face, kissing each other tenderly. "Will you marry me?" I spoke. "What did you say?" She gasped, pulling away from me. I sat down and pulled a box out of our beach bag. I opened it and held it in front of her. "I think you heard me. Debbie, will you marry me?" She sat up and looked at the 3/4-carat engagement ring in the box. "My God, Dave, it's beautiful." I pulled it out and put it on her finger. "Is it a yes?" "Yes, it's a yes, Dave. I adore you. I really do." The rest of the trip, we talked about marriage and getting married. We both agreed that waiting until she graduated would probably be the best plan. So we decided to set a date for next summer, probably late July or August. We both knew we wanted kids, but decided it was best to wait until Debbie started building a career. I had the day off, the day before Debbie was due to leave, to go back to school. Debbie, myself, and our parents went out to dinner to celebrate our engagement. All 3 women planned to get together Christmas to plan the wedding. Debbie and I agreed that we would decide on a date by then. Debbie stayed at my house that night, and we talked quietly until morning. This time, we definitely planned to meet at least once a month during the school year. I offered to drive to her place, but she said she would rather drive, or we would meet somewhere halfway between school and home. In her senior year of high school, Debbie was going to live off campus. Several friends, including Miranda, asked her if she wanted to live in the same house with them. Her share of the expenses wouldn't be much more than the dorm fees. She said she was tired of living on campus, and since she had car, getting to and from classes wouldn't be a problem. The next day, I kissed her goodbye and watched her get into her car and drive north. She barely made it to the end of the street, and I already missed her. I slipped back into the routine of the previous year. I now had a goal of finishing the house in time for our wedding. On weekends, I tried to relax a little and spend more time with my family. On Sundays, I was constantly getting dinner invitations to my in-laws or Debbie's in-laws' house. To be honest, I alternated every other weekend. Debbie's younger sister Sarah traveled to college from home, so she usually came to dinner or to when she arrived. We always had meaningful conversations and fun times. The last weekend in September, Debbie came home for her older sister's wedding. As you might expect, she and Sarah were bridesmaids. The wedding went off without a hitch, and everyone had a great time. Debbie and I danced, drank, and laughed throughout the reception. When October came around, Debbie and I were scheduled to meet near the end of the month, a couple of days before she called and said they had a snowstorm and the car had brake failure. She didn't think she would be able to make it. I told her I would go and stay with her. She declined, preferring to reschedule our appointment for the following weekend. She needed to get her car inspected and was sure the weather would be moderate. I changed my reservation to a motel in Mackinac City. We met the following Friday and spent a nice weekend sightseeing, including a day on Mackinac Island. When she first arrived, she looked distracted and out of sorts. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she was worried about schoolwork and exams. As we sat at dinner that first night, I was holding her hands and noticed something. I asked Debbie, "Where is your wedding ring?" Debbie looked at her hand as if she hadn't noticed. She blushed and replied, "I was doing the dishes before I left and took it off. I just forgot to put it back on." I then held up my other hand, which was sporting an amethyst ring. "I guess I'm just absent-minded. I probably grabbed one thing and forgot about the other," she said unconvincingly. "Well, next time, remember the diamond and forget the other," said I jokingly, and left the matter at that. Thanksgiving vacation came, and we had a wonderful 4-day weekend. Debbie spent most of it at my house. I showed her how things were progressing. We discussed a few of her decorating ideas, and I put them on the project list. We also did some shopping for light fixtures and rugs. When Debbie arrived home for Christmas, she said there were still problems with the car, and given the record snow year and up, she wasn't sure how many times she'd be able to get back this winter. I knew that even in the nicest weather, the trip would turn into a grueling 6-hour drive. Her dad and I looked at the car and decided it wasn't worth investing a lot of money in. I ended up buying a 2-year-old Jeep that was still under warranty. The mechanic inspected it, and it was healthy. I gave it to Debbie and told her that now I had no excuse not to drive it home. I said it kind of humorously, but she didn't seem to find funny. Debbie and the moms finalized the wedding plans. The date was set. The parish church and reception hall were booked. They took care of all the other details, and I was glad all I had to do was put on my tux and show up. I drove down and met Debbie at St. Ignace for Valentine's Day weekend. It was too snowy and cold to do anything else but admire the rugged beauty of the shoreline and the view of the bridge. But I had booked a suite with a hot tub at the hotel, and we were more than happy to spend most of our time in it, making up for the 6 weeks of separation. Debbie had planned to stay home for spring break, but work threw me a surprise. I was asked to go to Van Nuys, California, to give a training session on the installation of new equipment that was going to be in our plant for the new model year. The training was to take about 2 weeks, and it fell during spring break. I tried to decline, but was told I had no choice. Debbie was as disappointed as I was when I told her this. We knew our next chance to meet wouldn't be until a couple of weeks later. A few days after I broke the news to her, she called me back. She asked, since I wouldn't be home for spring break, if I would be okay with her going to Florida with her roommates. We discussed the idea, and I made it clear that I wasn't very excited about it and didn't think it was appropriate for an engaged person. I would feel better if she didn't go. Besides, I wondered how she could afford it. She assured me somewhat dismissively that she could take care of herself and I had nothing to worry about. And her roommates offered to pay most of the expenses if she went in the Jeep. The whole conversation made me feel uncomfortable, like the call was just a formality to back up and that she had already made her decision. It was the same feeling I had gotten last year when she treated me with such disdain. Just to get what she wanted. I brushed it off and continued to prepare for the trip to California. The trip was long and arduous. We worked 10 to 12 hours a day, and we only managed to take 1 day off to sightsee. I couldn't keep in touch with Debbie, but she kept in touch with her parents, and I kept in touch with them by the time I got home. Debbie had already gone back to school. I called her early the next morning, wanting to talk to her, and to my surprise, a man answered the phone, not knowing if I had dialed the number correctly. I asked, "Who is this, Tom? Who are you looking for?" Debbie couldn't connect. "Is this her number?" "Sure. Hold on a second." I heard him shout Debbie's name in the background. I heard Debbie say, "What?" And the man replied the phone. I thought I heard Debbie whisper, "You know you're not supposed to answer the phone. Who is it?" And the man replied, "I don't know. Some guy." Debbie picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" "It's me, Debbie," I said quietly. "Hello, darling. You're calling awfully early." "How was California?" she said hurriedly. "Didn't see anything much except the inside of the plant." "Who answered your call?" "It was Tom Miranda's boyfriend on a weekday so early in the morning. Well, he sometimes spends the night with Miranda. You know how it is, Dave?" She said this somewhat defensively. "Yeah, I know how it is, Debbie, but I don't like guys staying overnight at my fiancé's house." I said a little upset, "Dave. You have nothing to worry about. They've been going out together for a while now. Are we going to get together soon?" "I missed you on vacation, love." I let her distract me, and we discussed that we would meet in Harbor Springs in a couple of weeks. I asked her about Florida, and she vaguely replied that they had a good time and the weather was great. That conversation gave me an uneasy feeling, but it faded away. The rush before graduation and wedding plans. Harbor Springs was the last place we met before graduation. Debbie was doing well in all subjects and was on track to graduate on time. It was a remarkable accomplishment, and the chain store where she had been interning for the past couple of years offered her a permanent job as a manager, and she accepted. Debbie's parents and I had already talked about coming to the ceremony. When I mentioned this to Debbie, she tried to downplay the of her attendance. The ceremony would only take an hour and she wanted to leave right afterward, but I assured her that there was no way I would miss the event, and that was the end of it. As graduation approached, Carl, Angela, and I made plans to go there together. The event was scheduled for Thursday morning at 11 o'clock. We were unhappy when Debbie informed us that she would be at the senior party the night before, and that the next morning she and her roommates would be busy turning in the house to the landlord and heading directly to the auditorium. So, despite arriving the night before, we wouldn't see her until after the wedding. Most graduation ceremonies follow the same format, with school speakers and honorary grads speaking. The guest of honor speaks. The seniors are then summoned up to collect their diplomas. Then all of the grads throw their hats in the air. That's the end of it. We strolled out of the auditorium and into the street, where the graduates gathered to congratulate one another and their families, as well as to take selfies in their gowns, expressing delight or amazement that they had finally done it. We finally found Debbie among a group of graduates posing for photos as we approached. Debbie noticed we were separated from the others and approached us, hugging and kissing each of us. She joyfully showed us her diploma, and we took turns photographing her in our gowns. Her father mentioned something to her about seeing her pals. Debbie looked back at the group, which was still clustered around her, and immediately stated that the most of them are acquaintances rather than friends. But there is someone you will meet. Wait here and I'll grab her. And she dashed towards the mob, diving into it. A few minutes later, she reappeared, pulling a familiar visage with her. "This is Miranda." "Hello, Mom and Dad. My roommate Dave. You remember Miranda, right?" I said. "Of course. It's nice to see you again, Miranda. It has been a while." Miranda was embarrassed as we all shook hands. We talked for a few minutes until I finally asked Miranda, "Is Josh here? He graduated too, didn't he? I hope to see him." Miranda shook her head and responded, "He's not here, Dave. I believe he found a job on the West Coast and decided to leave." Debbie quickly interjected, "Dave, Mom, Dad, Miranda has consented to become my maid of honor. Isn't it great?" They all instantly began discussing the fantastic news. I couldn't help but notice Miranda didn't look happy with the concept. Miranda bowed out after a few minutes of talk, saying she needed to meet with someone. She moved aside and joined a group of 3 or 4 men who, I observed, were staring at us. One of them appeared to be enraged about something. I remarked this to Debbie, and as soon as she looks that way, she says, "We should get going." My car is already packed and in the parking lot. She took my hand and led me away from the crowd, followed by Carl and Angela after a joyful lunch at one of the town's good restaurants. We started the long drive home. I drove the Jeep alongside Debbie. Her mother and father rode in the rear. The ride was enjoyable. Debbie and I talked about the wedding, our honeymoon plans, and simply hung out. I was sad when Debbie informed me that she was going to spend the night with her folks. She sympathized with me, but stated she needed to stay at home for a few days to spend time with them, and her parents were not pleased with her moving in with me before the wedding. Even though they knew we frequently spent the night together, the weeks leading up to the wedding went by quickly. We both worked and did as much as we could around the house. The interior was mostly finished, with the exception of the hardwood floors above the garage, which needed to be refinished. I completed the rough finish on the workshop, but we will finish it during the winter. I was beginning to doubt that the house would ever be completed. The wedding day passed like a haze. Debbie was a stunning bride, and everything worked out perfectly. The wedding was relatively small. There are only approximately 150 guests. It astonished me that Miranda was the only college student Debbie invited, and she didn't even bring her boyfriend, but everyone had a fantastic time. The following day, we embarked on our honeymoon to the Caribbean island of St. Martin. We had 10 beautiful days in the sun. We ate exquisite dinners every night. We drank Heineken, beer, French wine, and pina coladas. I believe we made love every day. I shocked Debbie by taking her to a couple of beaches where no clothing was permitted. She was initially hesitant and bashful, but after the first few hours of camping, she took to it like a duck to water. I noticed that she had an inclination for exhibitionism. The image of her striding around the beach with that tan will be with me for the rest of my life. It didn't help that she was definitely one of the 3 most attractive women we saw on all the beaches. We relaxed at home and prepared to begin our married life. I started a 6-month rotation on the day shift. This was the first time I had worked the day shift since beginning the internship program, which limited the amount of part-time work I could perform while allowing us to spend every night together. It also helped us reconnect with old high school pals who we hadn't seen in a few years. We were financially secure enough that at least half of Debbie's earnings went toward repaying her student debts. We wanted to start paying them off before having children. Almost every weekend, we went to parties or rock and roll bars to dance. We even got to go camping twice more before the weather became too chilly. Based on our high school socializing, our group of friends formed a close-knit community. We were all very young and either had children or planned to have them in the near future. Some of us would occasionally go to bars together, but mostly we would get together for barbecues, chili, or simply a party at someone's house. It was time for me to resume my nights out. On the one hand, it would make it easier to balance lucrative part-time work and chores. On the other side, it would limit our social interactions. I was about 6 months away from receiving my journeyman license, and once I did, I'd be able to alternate day shifts more frequently. One unanticipated consequence was a decline in our romantic relationships. We were home every night, which extended our honeymoon into the winter. We light the fireplace 4 or 5 nights every week. We seemed to forget about everything else as we cuddled in front of the fire. Except on weekends, the love had vanished by the time I returned 2 nights later. Debbie did not appreciate me waking her up in the middle of the night when I returned home. And in the mornings, she was too busy getting ready for work to try to wake me up or do anything else. We eventually decided that one of us would take a half day off during the week just to connect. Every week, either she or I would take a day off or a half night off. It was not perfect, but it was the best we could do. Winter gave way to spring, and I was eager to complete a few chores before summer arrived. I was nearly completed installing the hot tub for the DC when I received a contract to install the fencing. I was also finishing the workshop above the garage. We began discussing having a baby and what we planned to do with the nursery. One day, the discussion shifted to baby safety and the advantages of utilizing a baby monitor to keep an eye on the young ones. Because I was an electrician, I went a step further and put intercoms throughout the house. I've even hooked up the deck and workshop to it. Regardless of where you were in the home or garage, the nursery could be monitored during this period. Several other electricians approached me about being a junior partner in a firm they were starting. The outside work was getting traction, so we decided to run it as a legal business. I installed a second phone connection between the house and the workshop so that I could work with them independently. It was unnecessary, yet it was a write-off. As the weather warmed up, Debbie and I were able to go camping for a long weekend approximately once a month. Sometimes we went with 1 or 2 other couples from our group. Sometimes we went alone. Debbie's first year of service ended in June. Debbie decided to stop taking the medication after this happened. Then in July, we celebrated our first anniversary. We wanted to do something spectacular and frequently discussed a vacation to Yellowstone Park. We agreed August was a nice time, so John and Kathy asked if they might join us. Slowly waking up, I discovered I was seated in a lounge chair on our patio, staring into space. I'd finished washing the van and hadn't remembered doing it in 3 years. 3 years? Debbie and I dated, became engaged, and married. Since the first time I met her, she had been the only person I sought. Could she have done it to me? I considered John and what I knew about him. He graduated from Gabriel High School a year before Debbie. They knew each other, but were not pals. John was now the owner of a construction company alongside many partners, including his best friend Craig. Craig and his wife were also members of our social circle. I'd known John for a few years, but I hadn't made any friends until Debbie returned home from school. I recall hearing a tale some time ago about John's prior partner who abruptly quit the company amid accusations that John was having an affair with his wife. There was nothing else to it, so I concluded it was just bar talk. John and Craig were real party animals. They decided to host happy hours on Friday nights with the other construction workers. They hailed it as a chance to develop business ties. I recall John's wife, Kathy, moaning bitterly that it was just an excuse to drink and lounge around till the bars closed. As I sat and contemplated the tangle of thoughts racing through my mind, I suddenly remembered a bizarre episode from last winter, right before I switched days. I was working on some machinery at an automobile facility. I spotted 4 or 5 men wearing suits and helmets heading down the aisle. I was idly watching them when I noticed one of them looked familiar. Josh, my former college roommate, called. When I yelled out to him, he came to a halt and his face brightened up as he recognized me. We hugged and rubbed each other's backs. He had some free time, so we went to the cafeteria and got some coffee. He ended up getting a position as a manufacturer's representative for the equipment supplied by a California company, but I worked from the Chicago office. And one of his clients was General Motors. His domain encompassed Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. He stated that he spent Mondays at the office and Tuesdays through Fridays. He was on the road. We began to talking about employment, and I told him about the internship program and my plans to return to school and earn a degree eventually. But then I smiled and added, "Of course my wife will say something about that." His face showed a shocked expression. "You got married. Congratulations. When did this happen?" I told him last August and inquired whether he was still single. He shook his head, saying he was too busy to be in a committed relationship. "So tell me what her name is," he inquired, smiling. "Come on, Josh. Do you know her?" Debbie was unable to connect. "Remember when you introduced me to her before I even left school?" "Of course I remember. She was Miranda's roommate throughout college." "So you guys dated again after college?" he inquired, puzzled. "No, Josh, I was not going to let her leave." After I met her, we dated for Debbie's final years of high school and even got engaged soon before the start of her senior year. Josh's face flashed with a variety of emotions that I couldn't identify before he faintly answered, "I never heard that." He suddenly looked at his watch and claimed he didn't have time and had to leave. I walked him out the door. But before he went, I requested for his business card and told him I wanted to call him. He said, "Yes, sure," shook my hand and moved quickly away. At the time, I amazed at his quick decision to depart. Over the next month, I called him several times to see if we could meet. He stated twice that he had conflicts and would call me back, but he never did. Now, as I focus on his reaction and other details that came to me during my discovery this morning, I realized that he was taken aback by the news that the two of us were getting married. I believed he knew something about Debbie and had deliberately avoided discussing her. As a result, he realized that all he knew was bad. I took his business card out of my wallet and thought about it for a few minutes before making a decision. It was Monday, and I knew he needed to be at the office. I grabbed up the phone in the kitchen and swiftly phoned his number. When he picked up, I gently murmured, "Josh, this is Dave." "Hello, Dave. What up?" He spoke wearily. "I hoped we could get together this week. When you are in the set I don't think this will be a nice week. Look, Josh, I know you're blowing me off, and I'm pretty sure I know why. I'm discovering certain things about Debbie that I'm sure you're aware of, and I'd like to talk to you about them." I simply replied. There was silence on the line for a few minutes before he asked, "Are you sure you want to do this, Dave? Isn't it preferable to leave it in the past?" "No, Josh. Whatever it was, I believe it is still going on. We were once good friends, and I trust your honesty." There was stillness in the receiver again. Finally, he answered, "Okay, Dave. I can change my schedule and be there tomorrow." "Will that work?" "That would be excellent. Josh, let's meet at the Westgate Tavern near the assembly factory. Do you know where that is?" "Sure. The earliest I can arrive is in approximately an hour." "Thank you, Joshua. I understand you don't want to do this, but it means a lot to me." We hung up, and I returned to my business to get my affairs in order. After my trip to Yellowstone, I considered working on a few of ongoing tasks around the house, but I thought, what the heck does this mean anymore? The next day, I arrived at the bar shortly before 1 p.m. and sat in a booth about 15 minutes later. Josh walked in and saw me. He came up, shook my hand, and sat down without smiling. "Beer and hamburger?" I asked. He nodded. We placed our order and then peered into our glasses for a few minutes. Finally, I asked, "Why don't I tell you about my life from the time I met Debbie until we married? Then you can tell me about your experiences in college." "Okay." I told him about how we dated for a year, broke up, and reconciled. I told him how much I adored her and how hard I worked to make her mine. I told him about our engagement throughout the year leading up to the wedding and how happy it made me. I informed him about the ups and downs, as well as all of the minor incidents that I was now questioning. When I finished, Josh cleared his throat and remarked, "I'm not sure what's bothering you, Dave." Then I told the account of our journey to Yellowstone, what I discovered when cleaning out the van, and the conclusion I couldn't avoid once I finished. Dave glanced at me with disgust. He shook his head at the woman. He hesitated for a few moments before saying, "You know, I still see Miranda from time to time." I shook my head no. She still resides in Milwaukee, but she travels to Chicago on work from time to time. Anyway, when we met and you informed me about the wedding, I called her and planned to see her for dinner, the next time she visited town. She's typically rather friendly. She and I had met a couple times during college. We even hooked up once and remained friends. But when I informed her I had run into you, she tried to keep it quiet. I became upset at her and accused her and Debbie of attempting to poach you. I made her feel so awful that she eventually let it all out. And I think she felt relieved. Miranda and Debbie were roommates for the final 3 years of college. And it turns out Miranda is the only person Debbie confided in about you. I have to warn you, Dave, because some of them are very ugly. It couldn't be any uglier than I imagined. I spoke angrily. Only you can assess that. He spoke uncomfortably. You were completely unaware of this. I spent the first semester of my junior year studying abroad in Europe. That is partially why you and I lost touch. When I eventually returned for the second semester, I had forgotten you and Debbie had dated before I left school. Debbie carried on with her life as she had previous year, seeing each other a couple of times per week. But this time, her relationship was more serious. She dated him for about a month. As soon as he became serious, she dumped him and began sleeping with these people. And it wasn't a huge secret. Miranda probably felt similarly. Anyway, Miranda stated that Debbie couldn't stay away from boys, even if she was dating at home. She informed Miranda that she had the best of both worlds, a guy back home who adored her, and freedom 400 miles away from home, where she could do whatever she pleased. Then she tricked you into accompanying Miranda to Texas for spring break. The high school fraternity boys were going there, and they asked Debbie and Miranda along. Debbie probably didn't think about it much till she got back. You did not want anything to do with her. She couldn't handle it. She told Miranda she'd do anything to get you back. Then Debbie returned to finish her senior year. She informed Miranda that she was engaged to you. Miranda assumed that meant something had changed, but it hadn't. Debbie is back where she was. She left off in the spring, but how did she disguise it? She wore a 3/4-carat engagement ring, and I got her a 2-year-old Jeep for Christmas. The title was in my name. Heck, she came to see me in the state virtually every month. I said. Josh shrugged. She never wore a wedding ring in high school and told everyone that her father gave her the vehicle. Anyway, it happened in May, right before school let out for the vacation. Miranda and Debbie decided to rent a house near university for senior year. Miranda's then boyfriend was in on the arrangement. Yeah, Tom. He answered the phone when I called his place one morning. I replied softly. Josh stared at me with empathy for Lee. Miranda's boyfriend was named Dan. Tom was Debbie's boyfriend. He stayed over from the previous school year. She inquired if he wanted to share a room with Dan when he moved in. They split the cost among the 4 of them, not the 3. The 4 of them stayed in the residence till graduation. I covered my face with my hands, attempting to suppress a shiver. Crap, rubbish. That is not all, Dave. The 4 of them traveled to Florida for spring vacation. I heard Tom covered Debbie's expenses because they were traveling in your Jeep. I shake my head. How could she and Miranda hide me from their boyfriends after all? Every week I called and texted with them. They were aware Debbie was seeing someone at home, but they pretended it was no big thing. Miranda was the only one who realized it was serious. On the night before prom, a group of high school seniors held a secret party at one of the college fraternities. I suppose Debbie and Tom spent the entire night there. When they got up in the morning to go to the graduation ceremony, Debbie informed Tom that she was returning home to marry. He did not take it well. 2 thoughts came to mind. First, there was the irate guy at the graduation ceremony, who Debbie seemed eager to avoid. Second, Debbie did not want to spend the night with me. When we arrived home that evening, she had spent the previous night with her lover. It wasn't difficult to guess why. God, what an idiot I was. I had been lied to from the start. How can you be such a cold-hearted, conniving jerk and keep it hidden for so long? I muttered as tears streamed down my cheeks. Josh glanced away from me and muttered, I'm not sure, Dave. She just did it. Miranda and her were friends, but by the end, it had stunned her, and the last thing she wanted to do was be Debbie's maid of honor and look you in the eye. Heck, she was dating Dan at the time of the wedding and was scared to bring him in case he said something. We talked more and had another drink. I couldn't swallow a bite of food because I was afraid I'd puke up. I knew there'd be more tears afterwards. Finally, Josh asked, What are you going to do, Dave? It is over. Josh, 3 years. I've poured 3 years into this relationship. 3 darn years. She lied to me repeatedly. She was the most significant person in my life from the moment I met her. But our connection seemed to mean nothing to her, I remarked bitterly. We sat in silence for a few minutes while I composed myself. I finally knew how a guy could kill in the heat of desire. Everything you told me happened before we married. For my own peace of mind, I need to know what she is up to right now. Perhaps I'll get an answer as to why. Then she will be a thing of the past. When we eventually said our goodbyes at his car, I spoke through tight teeth. I stated I would appreciate it if you didn't tell Miranda we were together. I don't want Debbie to suspect that I know anything. Of course, David, call me at any time. I apologize for blowing you off. I just didn't want to be in the middle of things. We shook hands and parted ways. I arrived home about an hour before I had to leave for my job, just in time to receive a call from Debbie. She typically attempted to call during the day, and if we didn't get through, I called her during my lunch break at work. I tried to seem as natural as possible, despite the fact that the sound of her words made me furious. She taunted me about coming home early this week to pull a little trick. I tried to act sorry when I told her I couldn't ask for a single day off this week because so many people were on vacation, but it was a lie. Then she proposed requesting Wednesday or Thursday off again. I reluctantly informed her that I had a part-time job on those days and would not be home. Another untruth, assuming she would not agree. I told her I'd be home all day Friday if she was interested. She hesitated for a while before adding she didn't think she'd have any free time on Friday after saying, "I love you," to each other. We hung up the telephone. I wistfully looked at the phone, recalling what John had said on the way to Yellowstone. He had stated he'd be working in Southfield all week, but he laughed and told me he'd be returning on Friday. Happy hour. I pulled up Kathy's work number and dialed it. When she responded, I asked whether John was out of town, and she said he was not. I told her. I wanted to borrow some tools from him. She stated he'd be returning on Friday, and Riley joked that it would most likely be just in time for happy hour. I promised her I'd call him over the weekend and hung up. I assumed that if Debbie and John were seeing each other frequently, they would get together again at the first opportunity. Given that I'd be out of town until Friday and would be home over the weekend, it made sense that Friday night would be the finest opportunity. And then I remembered something from earlier in the summer on Saturday morning. I got up before Debbie put the coffee out on the deck, and the hot tub was in disarray. The top was off, and there were a few empty beer cans scattered around. Debbie rose up and threw a couple of moist beach towels over the railing. I asked her about it. She was a little embarrassed and explained that she had gone for a drink with a couple of girls from the workplace after work, and they had returned to the house and used the hot tub. She apologized for not picking up after herself. Now I was wondering who was in the bathtub. Since then, she has described going out with her girlfriends on Friday nights and retiring to bed the next night. I realized I couldn't bear the prospect of sleeping next to her. I ended myself laying on the bed in the study. She was so astonished that she called me a few hours after I arrived at work to inquire why I hadn't gone to bed. I told her I felt I had a stomach problem and didn't want to wake her up. She suggested I take some Pepto-Bismol and go to bed before hanging up. By the way, have you checked the pH level in the hot tub since we returned from Yellowstone? I answered her. No, I certainly have not. Could you do that, honey? I don't want it to diverge too much from the norm if we suddenly decide to use it. She murmured teasingly as she picked up the phone. I thought, someone's about to utilize the hot tub and it won't be me. Whatever is going on, it appears to be happening on Friday night. I instantly decided to take Friday off that night at work. I started thinking about how I needed to acquire information and evidence. I figured that with the assistance of my electrical friends, I could possibly bug the house, but not on such short notice. And then it hit me. The intercom system I had installed when I was a child. The following morning, I got my tools and began removing the intercom faceplates. I discovered that by modifying only a few wires, I could keep each unit in transmit mode. I changed them all, even the one on the deck near the hot tub. Now, the only place that was receiving a signal was my workshop over the garage. I tested them all using a portable radio receiver from the workshop. I could hear the radio in each room decide to go further. I dashed to an electronics store and purchased a half-dozen ultra-sensitive tiny microphones. I replaced the mics in the intercoms with these and discovered that this boosted their sensitivity by approximately 20%. When I finished the project, I sat in the workshop and reasoned that now that I could monitor what was going on in the house, I should be able to record the information. I had an ancient dinosaur of a reel-to-reel tape recorder that one of the electricians had given me to experiment with. I used to record songs on it and occasionally play it while fiddling. I took it out and placed the microphone on the intercom speaker. I tried it by turning on the radio in many rooms in the home and playing the sound. Everything worked flawlessly. Rail was so large that I thought I could record for nearly 6 hours. I stood up and glanced out the attic window. The garage was at an angle, allowing me to see the rear, deck, and sliding glass door to a portion of the kitchen upstairs. I could also peep out the master bedroom window if the curtains were drawn. But at night, unless the lighting was exactly right, I'd probably only see shadows. I decided that sound would be sufficient for my needs. That evening, after work, I made my normal call home. Debbie and I talked for a bit. She told me how much she missed me and wanted I could return home sooner. I pretended longing and regret that I couldn't do it. I told her we would catch up over the weekend. She inquired casually if the hot tub was okay, and I told her it was another lie. That night, I slept on the card as I had all week. Debbie called just as I was about to leave for my work on Friday. She claimed she wanted to inform me that she would be seeing her girlfriends for drinks and possibly dinner after work. She wanted me to know this in case I called and she wasn't home. I told her no problem, and that I had overtime scheduled for that night, so I'd be a bit late as well. The blatant manipulation and outright lies that were now so obvious simply rejected me, and she was fine with that. How had I allowed myself to be duped for 3 years? Was it her beauty? Was it someone I was madly in love with? I like how I didn't notice everything else. Did I have a major character fault that allowed her to do this to me? As I pondered these things, I relocated the van to a cul-de-sac a few streets back from our house. Our lightly built area had a passage through the woods that I could use to sneak around the back of the garage. I entered through the back entrance and walked up to the workshop. I slumped wearily into an old, broken chair. I remained there, reclining back in my chair. I closed my eyes, exhausted from a few days of insufficient sleep and continual mental strain. My eyes suddenly opened, and I noticed it was dark, both inside and out. I was startled awake by the sound of the garage door opening. I looked at the clock and was astonished to see it was almost 8 o'clock. I'd slept for over 3 hours. I tiptoed over to the door to the garage and opened it slightly. I saw the Jeep come up and saw the top of Debbie's head as she stepped back out. I crept up to the dormer window and saw the edge of the car in the driveway, and in the faint light of the porch light I could see John standing. They hugged before moving toward the home and disappearing through the intercom. The keys rattled in the lock, the door opened, and there was a murmur of voices. I promptly turned on the recorder and sat on the workbench where I could see out the window and monitor the back of the house. "Just be patient," Debbie added, laughing. I heard John mutter something in answer. "I need to go to the bathroom, pour myself a glass of wine, and get a beer." She remarked this while strolling past the kitchen. I heard her touch the answering machine button on the counter as she walked past and was told there were no new messages. A minute later, I noticed the light in our bedroom turn on, and I strolled through the open window into the master bathroom. I could hear her shouting for the toilet to flush and the water gushing into the sink. Meanwhile, I could hear John clinking bottles in our pantry. I heard the cork pop as he opened the bottle and poured a glass. The refrigerator door opened, and I heard him pop the beer's lid. I clenched my teeth as it was clear he knew where everything was and had made himself at home. Debbie stepped out of the bathroom and stood in front of the bedroom window. She moved over to the dresser and retrieved something from the bottom drawer while standing up. She slid it over her shoulders and knotted it. The sparkling silver fabric reminded me of one of the periods I got her in St. Martin during our honeymoon. She turned toward the door and the bedroom light went off. A moment later, in the dim light of the kitchen, I seen her stroll by the sliding glass door. "Wow," John commented. "That's quite an outfit." "Thanks. Does it catch your attention?" Debbie laughed. "It sounds like Dave is spending his time on it." He responded, "The patio I bought for her honeymoon," I thought cruelly. She usually kept it for special occasions. Now she was wearing it for him. Crap. Let's head upstairs, Debbie said, John, nearly whimpering. We have entire night ahead of us. Dave is working late. They sat there drinking, talking, and laughing as if they didn't care. They clearly felt at ease being here and together. It was clear that this wasn't the first time John got out of the tub and grabbed another drink. When he returned, he took a step into the water in front of Debbie. Did you observe Craig's expression when we left the bar? And you asked if I might come over for a while? He laughed. Yes, I believe he was just a little jealous, she said absent-mindedly. John gulped his beer and admitted that he was a little angry off. But you've had fun with him before. You two tell each other everything, right? He usually replied with a faint chuckle. It was only once, and it will never happen again. She spoke aggressively. Why? Because the difference between you two is that Craig has a few beers and is unable to keep up. You love her regardless of how much you drink. You always have a great time. After a while, John commented that making love in the vehicle and visiting Yellowstone was awesome. It was enjoyable to beg for a camping vacation so that we could be alone. Debbie laughed because if Dave and Kathy only knew, all they could speak about was lake fishing and the scenery. I believe I have the nicest view, which was exactly what I required. It was the only time I grumbled during the entire vacation. John, what is the matter? Do you and Kathy not get along? It's okay by her standards. She has had Jake since he was born. This is a procreation-focused mentality rather than a recreational one. Now having fun requires some serious negotiating. Debbie laughed. Poor baby. Thank glad you accepted my invitation to happy hour on Friday and we hit it off. You may thank Dave for that. If he hadn't gone to second shift, I may never have had the need. Besides, if it weren't for me, you'd just be hitting on someone else. Maybe so. But you're the most beautiful woman I've ever been with. But certainly I should thank him for not doing the work for you. Don't get me wrong, he does a terrific job. But you're here and he's not. After a few moments of silence, John continued. Why did you two get together in the first place? It doesn't sound like pure love to me. When I was in college, I had a lot of boyfriends, but I prefer to have a boyfriend when I arrived home. Dave became that person. He was a persistent and courteous guy, decent looking. When we were together, I felt it would be lovely to be married, but then I'd go back to college, and I wasn't so sure anymore. But when you had all those college lovers, what convinced you to decide to go for it? Darn it, John. Look at this house. He may be at better homes and grounds. He makes at least twice as much as all those frat dudes. Of course, he works twice as hard, too. But Dave gives me whatever I want. I've got him wrapped around my finger once. We have kids. I'll probably never work again. Debbie sighed and flung her head back. Yeah, I'll have everything. A lovely house, nice automobiles, a couple of kids and a spouse who makes a lot of money and is gracious enough to change shifts a couple of times a year, letting me play sometimes. What more could a girl want? When she said that, I grunted and leaned my back against the wall. I felt like I'd been punched. Was this really what our partnership was about? Just money and things? Since we're talking about what a girl desires, how about we head up to the bedroom for a while? Suggested John. Come on, Debbie. Let's head upstairs. Sure, answered Debbie, giggling. Okay, I thought to myself. I've heard enough time to boot that butthole out of my house. I grabbed out my work phone and phoned our home number. When the phone rang, I heard Debbie say, It's probably Dave. Crap, I told him not to call. Are you going to answer it? Asked John. No, let it go to the answering machine. After the fourth ring, the answering machine picked up after the beep. Trying to speak normally, I said, Hey, honey, you're probably still out. I'm still not feeling too good today. My supervisor let me leave early, so I'll be home soon. Bye. I leaned back in my chair and watched and listened as everything around me started blasting off in different ways. Debbie sprang to her feet, grabbed a towel, and yelled, John, you have to leave now. What? Why? We have time. No. He told me that sometimes he may go home in 15 to 20 minutes with a little traffic. And if he goes through all the traffic lights, I have to clean things up and look like I just arrived home in time for his arrival. Now come out and help me put the cover back on the hot tub. John continued to whine and complain as he assisted her with the cover. Darn it, John, shut up and get dressed. Apparently, she gathered up his clothes and flung them at him, and I could hear her scooping up beer cans. They both went into the home, and I heard her tell him to call her next week and then slam the door shut. I listened as his car began and pulled out of the driveway. I stopped staring out the window and settled back in my chair for a moment. I could hear Debbie fussing inside the TV running and her rinsing dishes in the sink. I continued to sit there thinking about my life, my marriage, and my future. The last thing I heard from the house was Debbie's furious muttering, "Darn it, Dave, you destroyed my evening. So where are you?" And I thought, isn't this just too darn bad? I closed my eyes for a few minutes and then realized I hadn't heard any sounds in a while. I looked at the clock. It was past midnight. The house was quiet and dark. Only the porch light was on. I turned off the tape recorder, stepped out the back entrance of the garage, and walked back to the van. I drew up to the house and parked in the driveway without turning on the light. I softly snuck into the house, not wishing to sleep. I took a bottle from the fridge and stepped out onto the patio. I sat in the dark, looking up at the stars and thinking about the idea that I would have to end it tomorrow. Depression hung over me like a heavy cloud, sighing. I stood up and turned toward the house. In doing so, I grabbed my foot on, something that swept toward the hot tub. I reached down and picked up what turned out to be a wallet. I stepped into the kitchen and opened it in the nightlight. I saw John's driver's license. I climbed slowly up the stairs and stood for a moment at the bedroom door, listening to Debbie's steady breathing. I turned toward my office and hid the bed so I could sleep alone again. I flung my wallet on the desk and a bunch of items spilled out of it. I reached for the bag labeled Trojan Ultra Thin. I cautiously put it back on the table and laid down on the bed and drew the blanket over me. I gently woke up to the sunlight flowing through the window. The faint murmur of the shower could be heard in the bathroom. Everything that had happened the day before came back to me overnight, staggering to my feet. I struggled to my feet and shuffled to the other restroom to do my business. Afterwards, I cleansed my face and stared in the mirror at my darkened eyes. I returned to our bedroom just Debbie stepped out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel. "Hello, babe. What occurred to you last night?" she said. "What do you mean?" said I, a little embarrassed. "You claimed you were coming home early and then you didn't." She moved over to me and smacked me on the lips. "Something came up and the boss didn't want to let me depart till midnight," said I. "Are you feeling okay?" "You need a shave, honey," she said. "I'm still a little nauseated," was the plain truth. She smiled sweetly at me. "I have something that will make you feel better." I stood there without moving and looked into her eyes. "So what can you supply me for? You want to get pregnant, don't you? Next time you go out with John, tell him not to use protection." Debbie's face turned as white as the blankets on the bed. Her mouth opened and closed without making a sound. Or maybe Craig. "Of course. You'll have to keep him away from the drink so he can last long enough." Finally, Debbie managed to squeak faintly. "What? What did you say?" I brought my face right up to her nose and stated grimly, "I guess you heard me. Now get out of my house," I shouted. She was so astonished and surprised that she rolled away from me, tumbled to the other side of the bed, and landed with a thump. Her head came out over the covering and she glanced at me. Her eyes were as large as saucers and her mouth was ajar until she eventually managed to mumble out, You don't. You don't make sense? No. Or maybe Tom. Terrific. Do you remember Tom, your roommate in your senior year of college? I said it sarcastically, which provoked a piercing gasp from her. I turned to her drawers and opened a number of them. I gave her a pair of jeans and a shirt and ordered, "Get dressed now. You're leaving?" She stood on the other side of the bed from me and started hooting. But Dave, I live here. Not anymore. Now get dressed or you're going outdoors looking like that. I grabbed my clothing and stormed inside the room. I pulled a phone book out of a drawer and found the number 4 yellow cab. I called and requested for a cab as fast as they could send one. Debbie sat on the side of the bed and sobbed. "What don't you understand, jerk? All I wanted was for her to get out of here as quickly as possible." I rummaged through the wardrobe and tossed her a pair of sandals. "Please, Dave, I adore you. Don't do this to me. Furious. I said you love me. What the heck does that mean? You're a lying, dishonest cheater who doesn't know what love is." She dropped on the floor, crying and wrapping her arms about her head. She just sat on the floor, covering face with her hands and sobbing. I took a glass of water and dumped it over her head. She snarled and strained to get to her feet. She had to grab onto the counter to prevent from falling over so upset. Was she at that moment? A honk was heard from the side of the driveway. She raised her head and whispered, "What is it? It's you're going for a ride. But what about my Jeep? I have a Jeep. No, I have a Jeep. It's registered in my name, remember?" She looked in fear as I picked up her keyring and pulled her house and car keys from it. Then I dropped the keyring into her purse and pressed the purse into her hands. "Come on, let's go." I took her hand and drew her toward the side door. She tried to speak, sobbing and hiccuping, but I wasn't listening. I shoved her into the back seat of the cab and closed the door. Leaning into the cab, I paid the driver USD 50 and told him to take her to 5935 West Barnes Road. The driver looked back at the practically hysterical woman in the back seat. "Are you sure?" he said. "Yes, that's where she lives. And here's another tow to make sure she doesn't come back here." "Will do." And he swiftly placed the car in reverse gear and pulled out of the driveway. I saw them pull away, and then carefully made my way back into the home, pulling a beer out of the fridge. I sank into a kitchen chair and gazed at the wall until my wrath dissipated. It was over. It really was over. For over 3 years, my existence had revolved around thoughts of Debbie. All my actions had been centered on making her pleased. I felt empty and bereft when I realized it was all done. For a time, I just sat there, tears flowing down my face. Eventually, I started thinking about what I needed to do next, and what I needed to do after this, and so on and so on. And then I chuckled with relief, understanding that I had a plan and my life wasn't ended. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number. "Carl, it's Dave. I wanted to let you know that Debbie is en route to your place. She's no longer welcome here. You can send someone over for the rest of her items. And no, I don't want to talk about it right now. Bye." I hung up the phone. I sat there sipping my beer and felt the stress. Leave my body when the drink was finished. I went upstairs, had a long, hot shower, shaved and put on clean clothing. I stood in our bedroom, unsure where to start. I grabbed some boxes and dumped all of Debbie's toiletries into them. Then I started shaking out the contents of Debbie's closets and drawers into trash bags. When I was done, a massive mound had accumulated on the floor. I took the box to pack Debbie's college textbooks. As I did so, I observed John's wallet on the table pensively. I grabbed it up and began leafing through the contents. Having made my decision, I took up the phone and dialed his number. After a few rings, Kathy picked up. I had always liked Kathy. She was clever, pretty hard-working, and enjoyable. I felt awful about what I was about to do, but she deserved to know the truth. "Katie, it's Dave. Is John here?" "Hi, Dave. He's still in bed. Can I ask him to call you when he gets up?" "No, just tell him he may come and grab his wallet any time." "His wallet? How did his wallet end up there?" she said, puzzled. "I guess he lost it when he took his pants off last night." "Is this some kind of joke?" she remarked, starting to laugh. "I don't think so," I said, fully serious. "Okay. So why did he take his pants off?" "Well, he had to take them off to go in Debbie's hot tub." "Dave, that's not very humorous. I told you it wasn't. Is Debbie in there? Let me talk to Debbie." "Debbie doesn't live here anymore, Kathy." There was silence for a minute, then, my God, he did not. Yep, he really did. "I have to go," she whispered into the phone. "Tell John I'd really like him to come over and grab his wallet. I'd like to have a chat with him." I said this vehemently without another word. She hung up. An hour later, I was lugging another garbage bag of Debbie's stuff into the garage when a car came onto the driveway. I paused and saw Sarah get out of the car and approach over to me. She stopped, put her hands on her hips, and exclaimed, "She finally got you, didn't she?" "Yeah," I unwillingly admitted. She looked at the mound of bags I was refilling and inquired, "No chance, not a chance in heck," I said strongly. She nodded in accord. "Did you come to grab her stuff?" I asked. "No, I came to see how you were doing," replied I in uncertainty. "I'll take them with me when I depart. But I did come to see if you were really done with her, and if you did put my paddle in the water." "I don't understand, Dave. I've been partly in love with you since you started dating Debbie when you reconciled after the separation. I told her she best treat you right or I will. Now I think it's too soon for you to be dating your ex-sister-in-law, but I want you to know that I'm intrigued. Think about it. Now help me load her belongings into the car, and I'll get them out of here." Getting into the car, she said, "By the way, Debbie is home. Dad and Mom are attempting to prevent her from having a nervous breakdown." I suppose the fact that she was eventually caught broke her little fantasy world. I guess there really is justice in the world. She giggled, kissed me on the cheek, and departed. I stared after her in absolute amazement. I didn't know what to anticipate when she drove up, but certainly not this. A few days later, Katie came to get John's wallet. I turned the tape on for her and she cried. Wiping her eyes, she said, "I know it wasn't the first time. I'm very convinced he was playing around with his prior business partner's wife a couple of years ago. He suddenly went out of business and John couldn't explain why. When she left, she requested if I would make her a duplicate of the recording. I agreed. Carl started phoning virtually every day and pressing Debbie and me to talk about the fourth time I him. Not just no, but hell no. And transcribed the tape to a cassette and send it to him. He only called once after that, and that was to apologize to me. I also sent a copy to Kathy and my attorney. I later found that Kathy and John had split but were going to marriage counseling together. I never waited to list Debbie as the owner of the house, and after all, I kept records and signed for every dollar put in it. Eventually, I agreed to give the Jeep away as there was some uncertainty that it was my gift to her. A few items of furniture and a division of the cash and the checking and savings accounts finalized the property settlement. Think the availability of the tape prevented Debbie and her attorney from demanding more. They obviously didn't want me to play it for the judge. I put the house up for sale as soon as I was confident it would not be designated common property. I had no desire to live in it. I had bought and remodeled it for one reason only, and that reason was gone. It was a sad reminder of a part of my life that I wished to leave behind. It sold quite easily, and as I thought, I made a large amount of money for it. Around the same time that the divorce was finalized, I earned my journeyman license. When everything worked out, I decided to go back to my dream of going back to school. An electrical engineer with an electrical qualification is always in great demand. I took a leave of absence from the car plant and went back to college. The money I was receiving from home was more than enough to pay tuition for the 3 remaining semesters plus basic living needs. I continued to work for the partnership 15 to 20 hours a week. With this money in my savings, I could live comfortably, so I rented an apartment near the college I was attending. It just so happened to be the same college Sarah was attending. Coincidence? Well, maybe they have an excellent engineering school. Sarah and I continued to meet up roughly once a week for lunch, drinks, or just a discussion. She kept me in the know on Debbie's affairs, and I didn't have to ask. Carl and Angela despised her so much that as soon as she got her Jeep back, they asked her to move out. And shortly after the divorce, she transferred to a store in suburban Detroit. Now they rarely see her. Debbie tried to get me to talk to her before and after the divorce was finalized. She relayed the message through Sarah. Since I refused to take her calls, I urged her to inform Debbie that I was going on with my life and there was nothing she could tell me to change. Sarah and I continue to become closer. I understand that there is an undeniable attraction between us, and every time we meet, she teasingly reminds me of her interest in a relationship. Thank you for taking time to hear today's story. If you enjoyed this article, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a tale to tell about your or someone else's circumstance, please don't hesitate to contact me.